case of Sarai Sierra. She went across the ocean to meet her death. The high-profile case of an American girl photographer named Sarai Sierra 10 years ago stirred the world and brought the intelligence services of two countries located on different continents to their feet. The U.S. citizen disappeared without a trace during her photo tour in Istanbul, as if vanishing into thin air. This story was widely covered in the press, and the situation and circumstances were so strange that it gave rise to a lot of rumors and conspiracy theories. Despite active, large-scale, and timely searches, it was unfortunately not possible to find the girl alive. Her body was found in the historic center of the city, near the walls of Saraburnu. But how did it happen that, in a white day in a popular tourist spot, so simply took a person's life and no one even noticed it? To understand this case, it is necessary to restore the whole chain of events that led to this tragedy, and now we will try to do it together. Sarai Sierra. Early years. Sarai Sierra was born in New York in 1979 on November 9th and became the second child in a large family. She was brought up together with her older brother David and younger sister Christina. Their parents, Dennis and Bethany Syme Jimenez, were of Puerto Rican descent, but immigrated to the United States in 1973, settling in Manhattan where their children were born. Shortly after moving, the couple joined the local Protestant community and became evangelical Christians. They brought up all their children in strictness, following the religious canons of their adopted faith. The family attended church regularly, socialized with other members of the community, and the children attended Sunday school. Sarai grew up to be an active, creative person and also stood out for her strong-willed but rather complex character. Unlike her younger sister, Christina, who was a quiet, obedient, and very modest girl, Sarai was considered a rebel and a hooligan. But at the same time, she respected her parents, recognizing their undisputed authority. In the Jimenez family home, there were strict rules to which all members of the family obeyed. This applied to the daily routine of its inhabitants, many everyday moments, as well as norms of behavior. For example, the daughters were not allowed to socialize with boys, go on dates, or be out of the house after 9 o'clock in the evening. All their friendly contacts were controlled, and church and her social circle was limited to the people in those places. The active, energetic, socially oriented girl was bored and cramped within the framework in which she was kept. But her parents were sure that they were doing the right thing for the good of their children. During her school years, Sarai planned to enter a pedagogical university and become a teacher in the field of pedagogical university and become a teacher in the field of culture or arts. But closer to the end of her studies, she became interested in psychology and began to think about connecting her future profession with this field of activity. During one of the meetings of the religious community, slender, dark-haired beauty attracted the attention of a young man named Steven Sierra. He was the first to approach her and made an excuse to talk to her. Sarai was barely 18 years old at the time, and her new acquaintance was 7 years older than her. But despite the age difference, with the approval of their parents, the young people began dating. Steven immediately liked Dennis and Bethany, who thought that this decent, polite, and honest young man would be a good match for their daughter. Most likely, Sarai was not madly in love with the guy, but agreed to marry him, mostly for the sake of finally moving out of her parents' house and freeing herself from such tight control. It should be noted that Sarai had a good relationship with her parents, but she wanted some freedom to live her own life and plan her own future. Less than a year after meeting, in February 1999, the couple got married. The bride was 19 years old at the time, and the groom was 26 years old. Soon after, the couple moved to the state of Michigan where Steven's parents lived. For Sarai, this move was a real event because before that, she spent all her conscious life practically without staying in his native New York. The change of scenery did her good, and in a new place, she seemed to revitalize. Sarai enjoyed shopping for things for her new home, making it cozy, enjoying new acquaintances and new places. She got a job at a local dental office as a receptionist and was thinking about getting a college degree after all. However, Sarai soon became pregnant and had children, first a boy and then a girl. Entry into the university had to be postponed because the young woman was completely absorbed in motherhood and enjoyed it. A couple of years later, the family Sierra with 2 children again decided to move. And this time, they went to sunny California, settling in the picturesque neighborhood of Silver Lake in Los Angeles. Here, Stephen was offered a job, but soon the couple realized that the money he was earning, they do not have enough to live on. Then, having consulted, they decided to return back to New York and settled in a modest rented apartment located near the house of the Jimenez family. At that time, the couple faced serious financial problems. Sarai was still at home with the children, and her husband had to survive on casual income, because of which they periodically had to get into debt. The situation began to change for the better when the children went to school and the young mother got a job at an advertising agency. Stephen had, by then, found a permanent job as a bus driver on one of the city routes. A new hobby. Closer to 30 years, when the children have already grown up and life stabilized, Sarai again remembered her long-standing plans to get a higher education. By that time, she was not interested in the pedagogical faculty at all, and Sarai chose the faculty of psychology, entering one of the local universities. However, Sarai soon grew cold to her studies, and the boring hours of lectures caused her boredom. She decided to look for herself in another sphere and choose an occupation that would be to her liking, inspire her, and allow her to express herself. Since Sarai had always been a creative person, good at drawing and seeing the beauty in everything, she became interested in photography and soon joined a well-known New York photography community to be able to develop in this direction. She was widely recognized as having a real talent. Sarai was able to choose the right angles and harmoniously build compositions, making incredible in its beauty shots. Even professionals praised her work for her creativity and vision. In early 2012, on the advice of her popular social networks where she began to post her work, the success did not take long, and other users began to subscribe to the young woman's profile by the thousands, enthusiastically commenting on each of her works. In a few months, she became a real star, and the number of her subscribers continued to grow exponentially. Such a furor literally dizzy her head. Sarai felt that she could achieve more, that she wanted to develop and improve in this direction. So she made a proposal to organize a group photo tour in search of beautiful and unusual locations in different parts of the world. Sarai Sierra started with small trips around her native country, specializing in shooting architectural ensembles and various historical monuments. Her images were a great success, and she decided not to stop. Sarai wanted to travel to Istanbul, one of the most ancient and beautiful cities in the world, to capture its sights and historical sites. It should be noted that her parents were not thrilled with this idea, because she had never left the country before and never left home for so long. But Sarai was adamant. In addition, she had to be accompanied on the trip by her best friend Magdalena. As it turned out, Sarai's family was in crisis, and her relationship with her husband was falling apart. Perhaps part of the reason for her idea of a photo tour on the other side of the world was a desire to get away, change her surroundings, and reflect on what was happening in her family from a distance. Sarai had lived in a strict framework for too long, and now she was eager to do something she wanted to do, something her soul demanded. During that period, her husband's social media account began to show strange postings and statuses. He philosophized about the value of marriage, about love and mutual respect between husband and wife, and also noted that he would not cheat on his other half even if the marriage hangs in the balance. In one of the posts, Stephen opaquely hinted that his spouse was unfaithful to him, but a few hours later, he deleted the publication, leaving the questions that appeared under it unanswered. Stephen obviously didn't feel happy and loved and tried to show it to everyone through his social media page. Sarai was experiencing similar torment, but kept it to herself, trying not to complain and focus on her creativity. The long-awaited trip. Shortly before the planned tour, Sarai learned that her best friend would not be able to travel with her because of problems at work. The young woman was very upset, but did not change her plans because she had been going to it for too long. Sarai's relatives were concerned about the fact that she would fly alone to a foreign country across the ocean, but she assured them that everything would be fine, promising to call, write, and send photos every day. In addition, Sarai was also planning to visit Germany and Austria, where she had several commercial photography assignments already scheduled. Her entire trip was literally scheduled by the hour, and she was not going to deviate from the schedule. On January 7, 2013, a young American woman boarded a flight from New York to Istanbul. She was carrying a small amount of cash, a smartphone, a tablet, a fairly inexpensive DSLR camera, and several lenses designed for professional photography. Upon arrival, Sarai called her family, informing them that she had arrived safely and was on her way to check into the hotel she had booked in advance. It should be noted that she had a rather modest budget, so she had to stay in a remote area, which the locals considered unsafe. After leaving her things in the room and changing her clothes from the road, Sarai Sierra immediately went to the nearest metro station to get to the historic city center. She wandered the streets of Istanbul until nightfall, photographing its beauty and savoring every shot she took. In the evenings, she would call her parents and husband via video call, sharing her impressions and her plans for the next day. She would also process fresh shots and post them to her social media accounts. New friend. As it later turned out, Sarai was accompanied in Istanbul by a young man named Taylan. They met on social networks in the middle of 2012, and it was Taylan who convinced the American to fly to Turkey. For several months, they actively corresponded and became very close during this time. Sarai completely trusted her new acquaintance. They saw each other almost every day and together visited various attractions. The guy was a native of Istanbul, so he knew the city like the back of his hand and arranged for Sarai exciting excursions to the most interesting, sometimes unusual places. After a week's stay in Turkey, the photographer had a trip planned to a couple of European countries where, as I said, she arranged several commercial photo shoots. Here, Sarai saved money on hotel accommodation because she agreed to be hosted by her subscribers who had been following her work for a long time. These moments were negotiated and agreed in advance. So at the airport in Vienna, she was met by a young man in whose house she stayed for a couple of days. The Austrian acquaintance was a few years older than Sarai. He himself was fond of photography and admired her works, so he was eager to communicate personally with such a talented photographer. The trip went according to plan. Sarai visited all the places she had planned and met everyone she had arranged to meet. On the third day, she flew to Berlin, where she was also met at the airport by her subscribers who gave her a tour of the city. After finishing all her business in Germany, the photographer went to the airport again and returned to Istanbul, where she planned to stay for 2 more days before returning home. Upon arrival, she was met by Taylan, with whom they spent the day driving around the city, and afterward, they went to a popular local bar together. It was after midnight when the Turk escorted Sarai to her hotel, where they said goodbye. A mysterious disappearance in a foreign country. On January 21st, 2013, the last day of her photo tour, Sarai called her parents and has been to let them know what time and what flight she was taking to New York. She had never been away from home for so long before, so everyone was happy that her trip was finally coming to an end. However, before leaving, Sarai decided to take one last walk around the city and take some more beautiful shots for her account. At the appointed time, Sarai's father arrived at the airport to pick up his daughter because her husband was at work and could not make it. He arrived early because he was afraid of getting stuck in traffic and not being on time. They announced the arrival of the plane. All the passengers got off, but Sarai was not among them. Her phone was also unavailable, and all attempts to contact her were futile. Then Dennis waited a little longer, and then, concerned about his daughter's absence, went to the representatives of the airline. However, Dennis was literally shocked when they informed him that a passenger with such a name had not boarded the aircraft. Dennis immediately called Stephen and informed him of what had happened, saying that it was necessary to immediately organize a search. Sarai's husband first contacted the hotel where his wife was staying in Istanbul, but there he was told that her belongings were still in the room, and she had not checked out, although she should have done so yesterday, and did not appear in the hotel for the second day. This information caused a real panic among the family members because they did not know where Sarai was and did not understand how to proceed. Stephen, who had access to his wife's accounts, decided to check them, looking for some clues. There, he found his wife's correspondence with Thailand, which seemed very suspicious to him. Nevertheless, he decided to contact the Turk himself to find out what he knew. But Thailand claimed that he had seen the missing woman the day before the planned departure, and before the flight, she did not even call him, although she promised. Sarai's family immediately reported the incident to the American embassy in Turkey, and a day later, A large-scale search operation was organized on the spot, for which a special unit was even created. Almost immediately, Seray's husband and parents flew to Istanbul, deciding that they needed to be personally involved in the search. Besides, not much time had passed since her disappearance, and there was a high probability of finding her alive. Investigating police officers. The first thing decided to determine the social circle of the American and talk to those who saw her shortly before she disappeared. To testify were called employees of the hotel where she stayed, as well as her friend Tylen. The hotel manager stated that he last saw Miss Sierra the night before she left. She was leaving with a small bag and a camera in hand. She was supposed to check out later, but never showed up at the hotel again. And the next morning, they received a call from her worried husband, who informed them that Seray's belongings and documents were still at the hotel. The receptionist also described the clothes Seraya was wearing that day. The situation with Tylen was much more interesting and ambiguous. First, the guy's name was actually Tarkan, and why he introduced himself to his new acquaintance with an assumed name was unclear. Secondly, they had been in close contact for several months before their meeting, and Seray had arrived in Istanbul at his invitation. All of this suggested that there was a romantic relationship between them, but Tarkan himself categorically denied it, claiming that they were only friends. The next stage of the investigation was to recreate in as much detail as possible the route that Seray took that day. For this purpose, her cell phone data was checked, as well as street CCTV footage. Thus, it was established that the young woman took the subway to Sultanahmet district, visited the promontory between the Bosphorus Strait and the Golden Horn Bay, visited Eminönü Market. But there she was lost in a large crowd of tourists. Then her trail was retraced to the subway where she was going down to go to the Sarajevo walls, but she soon disappeared from the camera's view again. Frightening discovery. The searchers decided to go to the ruins of the Sarajevo walls to comb the area and interview people. Maybe someone remembered a lone woman with a camera in her hands. After several hours, the search was successful, if you can call it that. The body of a young woman with no signs of life was found near the ruins of the walls of ancient Constantinople. It was covered with an old dirty blanket, so it was not conspicuous. Investigators assumed that it was in this blanket that Sierra was brought here. Forensics believe the body had been there for about 10 to 12 days before it was found. There were no clothes on the lower part of the body, which immediately prompted a version of violence, which was later confirmed by experts. The autopsy revealed that Sierra died from a blow to the head with a blunt, heavy object. But there were also several hematomas on her body and a couple of ribs were broken. In addition, pathologists found particles of epithelium and blood under Seray's fingernails, and this indicated that she had defended herself and scratched the perpetrator. The crime looked strange and even ridiculous because the victim's bag, smartphone, and camera were stolen. But at the same time, she was wearing gold earrings, wedding ring, and expensive watch, which immediately caught the eye. All that could be found on camera footage from the area was a young woman who looked like Seray filming something on her phone. And then a man approached her, either hitting her or pushing her. And then they both disappeared from the camera's view. The attacker was not immediately identified. Versions and conspiracy theories. Almost instantly, the information was leaked to the media, almost provoking an international scandal. The whole point is that from the TV screens and from the pages of newspapers, every day appealed to people to help in the search for the missing American woman and tell if anyone knows anything. But at the same time, the investigation was silent. And when the body was discovered, the situation became even more confusing. Many people wondered why a young married woman suddenly flew alone across the ocean. What was she doing in Istanbul and Europe? And with what funds had she traveled there? It all looked suspicious indeed, and investigators initially thought that Seray had gone to see her lover, Tylen, aka Tarkan, and afterward flew to another man in Austria. But both her buddies denied being intimate with the victim. Turned out that the man who sheltered Seray in Vienna has a criminal record, in connection with which there was a version that he could use the American as a drug courier. But a thorough check did not confirm this speculation. There were also rumors that Seray could work for the U.S. intelligence services and to collect information in other countries. Allegedly, hence the money for intercontinental flights. This version looked untenable, so it was not even seriously considered. The investigation of this high-profile case was carried out by Turkish Special Services together with the FBI. But at first, they did not have any serious leads. Only a few weeks later, the police came to the alleged perpetrator, a previously convicted and unemployed guy named Tal Salih, collecting waste paper on the city streets. But it was not possible to communicate with him because almost immediately after the crime, he borrowed money from relatives and left the country, presumably going to Hatay province where he illegally crossed the border with Syria. After obtaining a warrant, police searched the suspect's home where they took a sample of his DNA and compared it with skin particles and seminal fluid found on the body of the murdered woman. After that, the last doubts were dispelled. Tal Salih was the perpetrator of the crime. In addition, the victim's phone was last switched on in the neighborhood where he lived. When it became known that the criminal fled to Syria, the special services lost all hope of getting to him. But soon, fate itself gave them an unexpected surprise. This guy was detained while trying to cross the border illegally again, but this time he was trying to return to Turkey. He joined the rebels in Syria and obtained firearms, but was injured in the conflict and decided he would be safer at home. However, he made his way back with his weapon, which was the initial reason for his arrest. But the local police soon realized who was in their hands and immediately reported him to the security services. When Tal Salih was brought in for questioning, his story was literally discouraging with horrific details. He saw a young woman on a hiking trail along the walls of Saraburnu, and for a few minutes, he simply admired her and watched her taking pictures. When he got closer, Sarai tried to ask him something using gestures, but due to the language barrier, he never understood what she wanted. However, he noticed a brand new iPhone in her hands and an expensive camera around her neck. As Sarai walked on, he followed her, already determined to rob her. It was getting dark outside, and there were no other people near the wall, at least in sight. At one point, Sierra turned around and, as it seemed to him, took a picture of him. That action became a trigger of sorts. Tal Salih grabbed a boulder and lunged at Sierra, hitting her hard in the head. After that, they literally rolled together down to the ruins of the wall, hence probably bruises and broken ribs on Sarai's body. Then Tal Salih, taking advantage of the unconsciousness of the victim, decided to commit violent acts of intimate nature. The perpetrator then delivered another severe blow to the head to finish Sarai off. Tal Salih took the victim's bag, her camera, and phone, and walked away. On his way, he came across the same blanket that someone had thrown away and decided to return to cover the victim's body with it. By that time, it was finally dark outside, and the chances of meeting someone at the wall were minimal. Once back, the perpetrator dragged the body a little to the side, positioning it so that it would not be visible from the hiking path. He then covered it with a blanket and left. Surprisingly, while the search for the American woman was going on, the perpetrator visited the crime scene one more time to make sure Soraya was dead, and her body was lying where he had left it. When Tal Salih learned from the news that his victim had been found, he realized that the police would quickly get on his trail, so he decided to flee the country, borrowing money from his sister who always felt sorry for him. By the way, he was never able to realize the stolen goods. The camera was broken in the process of falling. The smartphone had a password, which the criminal unsuccessfully tried to unravel while at home, hence the signal and all the other stolen items he threw away when he went on the run. The defendant did not deny his guilt, and judging from his accounts, he did not regret what he had done, nor did he suffer from pangs of conscience. As key evidence, DNA forensic evidence was presented, which confirmed that it was his skin that was found under the fingernails of the murdered woman, and his seminal fluid was found on her body. Also, Sarai's cell phone was last switched on in the vicinity of his residence. In addition, the case file was supplemented with a video surveillance camera recording of the attack itself. After all the evidence was presented, it was decided that a psychiatric examination was necessary because of the belief that Tal Salih was insane. This idea was suggested by his actions, behavior, and the calmness with which he described in detail the atrocities he had committed. But experts concluded that he was sane and fully aware of his actions when he attacked his victim. In the February, the judge effectively delivered the final verdict. Tal Salih was found guilty on all counts against him and sentenced to life imprisonment. Sarai's relatives considered this decision fair. The body of the murdered American woman, after all the necessary expert examinations, was transported to her homeland in New York, and all related costs were borne by a Turkish airline. Sarai was buried in compliance with all religious rites and traditions. Family members of the deceased created an internet site dedicated to her memory, where they published her works, which had not appeared anywhere before. The photos were a great success, and people from different parts of the world were ready to buy them. The money received from the sale of Picturesque, the family saved for college education for orphan children Sarai. As for Stephen, he categorically denied that in his and his wife's family, life was a crisis, which pushed the young woman on that fateful trip. Soon, Stephen became close to a girl from the Christian community who supported him in a difficult period and often came to his home to help him with his children and household chores. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to our new channel, where we uncover captivating and chilling cold cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. You won't want to miss the twists and turns we have in store. Let's continue. The case of Kelsey Smith went shopping for a gift and vanished without a trace. How often do laws enacted at the state level or the rules and policies of individual companies designed to protect people and make their lives more comfortable and safe end up causing harm rather than good? In today's story, a mobile phone operator refused to provide the location of a missing girl citing privacy laws. In reality, however, the company was obstructing the investigation, delaying the process. Although tragically, it was too late to assist the girl. In other cases, timely access to such data could save someone's life. The case of young Kelsey Smith, who was tragically killed just a month after celebrating her 18th birthday, not only shook the United States, but also captured the attention of the world as it was widely reported in international media. The girl was abducted in broad daylight from a crowded location, and her body, bearing signs of violence, was later discovered outside the city. The search for Kelsey took almost a week due to the inability to track her movements through her cell phone signal. This circumstance led to much debate and set a precedent that resulted in a series of amendments and the passage of a law named after the victim. But let's look at Kelsey Smith's story from the beginning and try to understand how she was abducted right outside a shopping center under the watch of dozens of surveillance cameras and whether this tragedy could have been avoided. We will also explore the personality of the abductor and criminal who was considered by all to be a loving husband and caring father. Who is Edwin Hall? We will begin our examination of this difficult case by getting to know the man who caused the terrible tragedy. Edwin Roy Hall, friends knew him as Jack Hall, was born in 1981, April 17th, in the small town of Lee's Summit, located almost on the border of the states of Missouri and Kansas. He was the second child in the low-income and extremely disadvantaged family. Edwin's childhood was hard, if not to say harsh. Parents of the boy used in large quantities of hot drinks and illegal substances, not engaged in the upbringing of children and mistreated them. Later, Hall will tell about the fact that at the age of 5, he was intimately abused by his uncle, his father's brother, but unequivocally confirm or deny this statement is simply not possible. Many thought that this detail was invented by the perpetrator's lawyer in order to make his client look like a victim of circumstances at the trial and try to mitigate his punishment. But be that as it may, and at the age of 6, Edwin found himself in an orphanage after his father was behind bars and his mother was deprived of parental rights. In the following years, the boy changed several foster families, but each time he was abandoned after a while and returned back to the orphanage. This was due to the uncontrolled aggression of the child as well as his cruelty. From an early age, Hall showed sadistic tendencies towards animals. He liked to torture them and watch the suffering. The boy did not recognize anyone's authority, disobeyed his foster parents, stole, and ran away from home. His last foster family returned Edwin to state custody at the age of 15. This was after the teenager attacked his stepsister with a knife. Then the tragedy was avoided and the boy was pitted and not prosecuted. However, a year later, he again came to the attention of the police when he deliberately hit another orphanage pupil, who was much younger than him, on the head with a baseball bat. As an adult, Hall had no record with the police and he seemed to have matured, taken charge, and finally reformed. At the age of 20, he married a girl named Alita who bore him a son a year and a half later. Edwin got an old Chevrolet truck from the 70s on which he worked, transporting various goods. His neighbors knew him as a quiet, humble, and friendly guy, as well as a good family man. However, he also had another secret life, which became known only when Hall found himself in the dock for committing serious crimes. Who was the victim? Kelsey Smith. Kelsey and Smith was born in 1989 on May 3rd in a place called Overland Park, which ranks as the second most populous city in the state of Kansas. She was the third of 5 children in the large and very close-knit family of Gregory and Missy Smith. Growing up alongside her older brother Steve and sister Lindsay, as well as her younger siblings, Kathy and Zach, she was very close to all of them. The family patriarch, Gregory Greg Smith, was a former military man and a veteran of the United States Navy. He had also served in the police force for over 2 decades and was now enjoying his well-deserved retirement. Meanwhile, the mother, Missy Smith, had dedicated her life to health care, having worked for many years at one of the local hospitals. Despite her professional commitments, she brilliantly managed to balance work with raising her numerous offspring and creating a cozy home environment. From a young age, Kelsey was an extremely active, sociable, and theatrical child. She loved to sing and dance, attended a music school where she learned to play several musical instruments, and eagerly participated in school theater productions and choir performances. In addition to this, she thoroughly enjoyed gymnastics and loved soccer, often attending various sporting events with her father and brothers, and she was a fan of the local team. Young Smith had many friends, possessed a great sense of humor, was talented in numerous areas, and knew how to make a good impression on those around her. She also had a profound love for animals from childhood and dreamed of going to college after high school to pursue a career as a veterinarian. In her senior years of high school, Kelsey took a job in the local orchestra, where she played the clarinet, performing at various city events. This job allowed her to save enough money in just 6 months to buy her first personal car, a 1987 Buick Regal. Her parents weren't too fond of the fact that her car was older than she was and offered to add some money from the family budget to buy something more recent. However, it was crucial for her to purchase her first vehicle independently with her own money, so she declined their offer. Kelsey's personal life. It's noteworthy that the Smiths went to great lengths to provide their children with the very best, caring deeply for their education and holistic development. However, they also raised their offspring with a strong sense of discipline. There were clear rules in their home that everyone abided by without exception. For instance, all family members were expected to share their plans and always inform each other if they were going to be out late. Kelsey herself was always punctual, never late, and would always tell her parents where she was going and who she was spending time with. During her senior year, Kelsey entered into a romantic relationship with a young man named John Beersmith. According to Kelsey, it was a deep and mutual love at first sight, the kind you read about in books or see in movies. The couple rang in the new year of February 2007 together, and from then on were practically inseparable. Smith's partner, a year her senior, appeared to be a serious young man who treated his beloved with the utmost care and respect. Both sets of parents approved of their children's choice and did not stand in the way of their relationship. In May 2007, Kelsey celebrated her 18th birthday. That same month, she graduated from high school and was thrilled to learn that she had been accepted into a prestigious college in Kansas, where she intended to study veterinary medicine. The following days were, without exaggeration, some of the happiest in the young woman's life. Unfortunately, they turned out to be her last. Smith, along with her classmates, attended parties celebrating the end of high school. She had a great time, fully enjoying the festive atmosphere as well as romantic dates with her beloved. At this point, she'd achieved everything she had wished for: admission into her dream college, a relationship with a worthy young man who was about to propose, and it seemed a long, happy life lay ahead of her. The disappearance from the mall parking lot. On June 2nd, 2007, Kelsey and John were preparing to celebrate a significant milestone in their relationship, the 6-month anniversary of when they first started dating. John planned to make the day even more memorable by proposing to Kelsey. He had a beautiful engagement ring custom made for the occasion, reserved a table for 2 at a restaurant, and the evening was set to be one of the happiest in their lives together. Kelsey was unaware of the upcoming proposal, which was meant to be a surprise. She too was looking for a gift to surprise and delight John. That Saturday, she styled her hair, did her makeup, dressed up, and drove her car to a Target Corporation store located just 10 minutes from her home. There was no indication of the tragedy that was about to unfold. Around 7 in the evening, she called her mother to say she had found a gift for John, but needed to find the perfect gift bag for it, preferably something with a romantic touch. Missy suggested checking a shopping mall across the street from Target, confident that it would have what Kelsey was looking for. Kelsey thanked her mother for the advice and said she would be home soon, where John was supposed to pick her up at 8 o'clock. That was the last time Missy heard her daughter's voice. Kelsey never made it back home. When John arrived at 8 with a large bouquet of flowers, he was shocked and frightened to find that Kelsey was not there. Her parents were equally terrified, as it was completely out of character for her not to answer phone calls or texts. She vanished in broad daylight in a busy area, and no one noticed her disappearance. Search and investigation. The family patriarch, along with his 2 eldest children, set out to search for their daughter. Upon finding her car parked at the Oak Park Mall, a sliver of hope emerged that Kelsey might still be inside the mall for some unknown reason. However, after searching through all the floors and stores and inquiring with the salespeople and security guards if anyone had seen the girl, they were convinced she was not there. Returning to the car, which appeared undisturbed without any signs of struggle or violence, the father, leveraging his experience as a former police officer, decided not to touch anything. It was possible the car was part of a crime scene, and it was crucial not to tamper with or destroy any evidence. The girl's parents reported her missing to the police that same day, but were initially met with resistance to start an immediate search. The explanation was that since Kelsey was 18, she wouldn't legally be considered missing until 24 hours had passed since her disappearance. However, Kelsey's father, not one to back down and using his old connections, insisted on an immediate search for his daughter. Moreover, he made inquiries to see if any hospitals in the city had admitted women matching their daughter's description. Kelsey's family and fiancé were interviewed that same evening to establish their alibis and rule them out as suspects, a standard procedure. Surveillance footage from the Target store was also reviewed. The videos showed Kelsey entering the store, browsing the selection, making a purchase, and then, while talking on the phone, leaving the building to head back to her car. At that moment, she was speaking with her mother, asking where to find a gift bag, and then headed to the mall across the street following her mother's advice. Essentially, Kelsey simply drove out, turned around, and parked at the Oak Park Mall, leaving her car near the side entrance almost against the wall. Her car was thoroughly inspected by experts. It seemed untouched from the outside. The gift she bought for John was on the passenger seat, and her backpack with personal items, a tablet, and a wallet containing about $300 in cash was in the back. Therefore, a robbery was quickly ruled out. It appeared that the car's owner had left only with her credit card and phone in her pocket, as everything else remained inside the car. No signs of a struggle, blood, or damage were found. There were no foreign fingerprints except for one found on the driver's seatbelt. This fingerprint belonged to neither Kelsey, her relatives, nor her boyfriend. Issues with the cellular company tracking the young woman's location could have been possible through the signal of her mobile phone. By that time, the device itself had become inaccessible, presumably turned off or damaged, but it was still feasible to determine the last known location where the mobile phone was active in order to narrow down the search area. However, Verizon Communications, the wireless carrier, did not provide the necessary data for the investigation for several days. Interestingly, the company did not outright refuse to cooperate but kept promising to look into the matter, effectively dragging out the process. Back in February 2007, telecommunications companies were allowed to withhold subscriber data from law enforcement agencies, including the police or FBI, without a specific court order. They cited information privacy laws, and even situations where an individual's safety or life might be at risk were not considered exceptions to this rule. The disturbing stranger. Upon closer examination of the surveillance footage, a chilling detail was uncovered: a mysterious stranger following the young woman like a shadow. He didn't stand out at first because he always kept his distance and didn't attempt to interact with Kelsey directly. The individual in question was a Caucasian male with a pleasant appearance, estimated to be in his early to mid-20s, sporting dark, short hair and a light beard. He was dressed casually in a plain white t-shirt and black shorts. He entered the Target store roughly half a minute after the girl and followed her through all the sections she visited, maintaining a few meters distance. This mysterious man was captured by all the surveillance cameras that Kelsey was. And later during the trial, the prosecution would describe his behavior as akin to a predator stalking its prey. He exited the store after her and making sure she was alone, followed her to the Oak Park parking lot in his Chevrolet truck. It's likely that he overheard her conversation with her mother as he was practically behind Kelsey while she was on the phone. Consequently, he could have learned about her plans to visit the neighboring shopping center. Unfortunately, Smith parked her car in a poorly chosen spot next to a side door near a storage area where shadows fell on her vehicle, making it nearly impossible to discern the events on the camera footage. While Kelsey was still seated in her car, the truck parked beside her and a figure in a white t-shirt and black shorts emerged. The stranger approached her from the driver's side door, and then she, presumably under the threat of harm, got behind the wheel of his Chevrolet, and the truck drove off in an unknown direction. Media attention and alert viewers. From the outset, largely thanks to the connections and experience of Gregory Smith, the media were enlisted to cover the investigation. Smith knew that the louder the outcry, the broader the coverage in the press, and the more attention it garnered, the higher the chances of finding their daughter and bringing the responsible party to justice. The story was covered not only in national, but also in international media, including on the popular show America's Most Wanted. When surveillance footage revealed the mysterious stranger following Kelsey, the frame showing his face most clearly were broadcasted in the news, urging people to come forward if they recognized the man. That same evening, the police began receiving calls from individuals claiming to have seen the man in various cities and even states. Although most of these reports were mistaken, each one was investigated. On June 6th, a Mrs. Migas called in stating she recognized her neighbor Edwin Hall in the footage, but had hesitated to report it initially due to doubt. However, seeing the information about the truck removed her last doubts, as Hall also drove an old 1970s Chevrolet. Horrific discovery at Longview Lake and suspects arrest. On June 6, 2007, several pivotal events unfolded in the investigation. First, crucial data regarding the last known location of Kelsey's phone signal was finally obtained from Verizon Communications. A specific cell tower was pinpointed, establishing a search radius of 1.1 miles to the north of it. Within 45 minutes of initiating the search operation, the lifeless body of the young woman was found in the brush near Longview Lake, Missouri, approximately 30 miles from where she was abducted. The medical examiners determined that Kelsey had been brutally assaulted and then strangled with her own belt. Her body was discovered without clothing, except for the belt used to strangle her around her neck. After the assault, her body was callously discarded in the bushes, covered only slightly with dry branches. Over the 4 days it lay exposed under the June sun, her remains were severely disfigured by insects and other wildlife, making them almost unrecognizable. Nonetheless, the examination confirmed that it was indeed the missing young Smith. The second significant event on June 6th was the arrest of the main suspect. When the police arrived at the man's residence, he was completely calm, acknowledged that his friends called him Jack, and agreed to provide a statement at the station. During the interrogation, he identified himself as Edwin Hall. Presented with a photograph of Kelsey, he claimed never to have seen her before. Even when shown surveillance footage from the store showing him following her closely, he insisted he had merely visited Target for personal reasons and hadn't noticed her, suggesting their appearance together in the footage was merely a bizarre coincidence, irrefutable evidence. Edwin was evidently confident that he had left no trace behind and could not be held accountable. His van was clean. He had assaulted the victim using contraception, leaving no DNA evidence. Therefore, Hall agreed to cooperate with the investigation and even volunteered to provide his DNA sample and fingerprints. Crucially, his thumbprint matched the one found on the victim's car's seat belt buckle, becoming a pivotal piece of evidence. Furthermore, During a thorough search of the suspect's home, a hidden air pistol was found with Kelsey's DNA traces on the barrel. Hall was then officially charged with the abduction, assault, and termination of the young woman's life. Since Smith was abducted in Kansas, but her lifeless body was discovered in Missouri, there arose a question regarding the jurisdiction of the trial. This detail was significantly important as it affected the potential sentence. In Missouri, the perpetrator faced the possibility of capital punishment. Trial and Sentence Hall, realizing the gravity of his situation and after consulting with his attorney, decided to fully admit his guilt and disclose the details and circumstances of the crime in hopes of receiving a lesser sentence. He recounted how he noticed Kelsey as she entered the store and followed her. Indeed, he was close enough to overhear her phone conversation, learning she planned to visit the shopping center across the street. Edwin made sure Smith was alone, followed her to the adjacent parking lot, and was pleased when she parked in a secluded spot near the side entrance. He then emerged from his vehicle armed with a pistol, waited for the victim to return to her car, and prevented her from closing the door as she was getting into the driver's seat. Apparently, she had already pulled out the seatbelt, but he didn't allow her to buckle up, leaving his print on it in the process. Next, he placed the pistol barrel in the unfortunate girl's mouth, coercing her to move to his vehicle's driver's seat under threat. Smith drove Hall's truck while he aimed the weapon at her and instructed where to go. Upon reaching a remote area at the state border, he ordered her out of the truck and led her into the bushes. There, he assaulted her, strangled her with the belt, and covered her body with branches. He meticulously cleaned his truck's cabin to remove any fingerprints, DNA, or other traces of the victim's presence and hid the pistol with Kelsey's saliva at his home, confident it would never be found. When asked about his motive, he couldn't provide a clear explanation, but indifferently commented on her fantastic legs. Additionally, during the investigation, several other women and girls victimized by Hall's actions came forward. As a result, charges of corruption of a minor harassment and theft were added to the existing accusations. Hall's lawyer attempted to appeal to the court's sympathy, highlighting his client's troubled childhood, past victimhood, lack of parental care, and upbringing in foster homes. The defense's efforts were in vain, but the lawyer was the only person to speak on the defendant's behalf and support him. Hall's wife was present at all court hearings, but sat quietly in a corner refusing to defend her husband. On September 16, 2008, Johnson County's judge sentenced Edwin Roy Hall to 27 life sentences without the possibility of parole. After hearing the verdict, the defendant apologized to the Smith family for his actions and then broke down in tears. He is currently serving his sentence at the Hutchinson Correctional Facility in Kansas. The Kelsey Smith Act. The role of Verizon Communications in this case, which hesitated for 4 days to provide data regarding the last known location of the missing girl's phone signal, drew significant attention. The company's leadership cited privacy laws and the absence of a court order, the issuance of which would take time. Although it was later determined that this information wouldn't have saved young Smith, in other situations, it could help preserve the lives and health of individuals in danger. This led to the enactment of the Kelsey Smith Act by Kansas in February 2009, mandating telecommunications companies to provide subscriber location information when there is a risk of death or serious physical harm to the individual. An additional 29 states, including Missouri by 2012, adopted similar legislation. In 2021, Oklahoma, Montana, and Illinois also passed the Kelsey Smith Act. Since its enactment, this law has helped save many lives. For instance, in 2015 in Lenexa, Kansas, when a perpetrator stole a car with a child in a car seat, the police were able to locate him within half an hour by tracking the signal from the mobile phone left on the back seat by the child's mother. In 2021 in Illinois, a similar method was used to find a young woman who attempted to end her life by jumping off a cliff. She survived, albeit with significant injuries, but the prompt tracking of her phone signal led to her rescue. Interestingly, the Smith family never requested the law to be named after their deceased daughter. The idea came from Kansas Senator Rob Olson. Following their tragedy, the girl's family established a foundation to assist crime victims and continues to raise awareness among young people about safety issues. The Irene Cortez case, an unfortunate accident or a contracted murder of a mother of many. They say a scorned woman is capable of unpredictable and desperate acts, with cold and cruel revenge being the most fearsome. But what about a scorned man? Many would say an offended man might resort to physical violence, drown his sorrows in alcohol, or combine these two scenarios. Yet men, generally less grudge-holding, can be more ingenious when it comes to revenge. The case of Irene Cortez, a Spanish citizen who met a mysterious end during a trip to Colombia, is complex and ambiguous. While her perpetrators were caught, convicted, and are currently serving long sentences, the deceased woman's family claims the real culprit remains at large and is portraying himself as a victim. Let's delve into this intricate story from the beginning and try to determine if a third party was involved or if the murder was indeed unintentional. It's worth noting that each party involved is still trying to prove their version of the truth. Who was Irene Cortez? Irene Cortez, born Lucas, was born in 1980 in sunny Granada, Spain, the capital of the province of the same name. She grew up in a well-off family with a brother and sister. Her parents ran a small but profitable business. According to some reports, her father passed away early, but her mother, Maria Lucas, took over the business operations, expanded the enterprise, and ensured her children lacked for nothing. Maria's older brother, Uncle Pedro Lucas, was also a significant help. Irene was the eldest of the 3 children. A beautiful and sociable girl, she loved being the center of attention and attracted boys from an early age. Shortly after finishing school, she married and was already pregnant. At 17, she became a mother for the first time, and 2 years later, she had her second child. Her mother and uncle provided considerable support, allowing her to pursue a good education despite early motherhood. In the early 2000s, Irene moved to the resort city of Malaga with her husband and 2 children. There, she opened an entertainment venue that quickly became popular and profitable. Initially a small disco bar, it eventually transformed into a full-fledged nightclub. In Malaga, the couple welcomed their 3rd child, and life seemed prosperous and stable. At 25, Irene's husband was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison for trafficking illegal substances. Tragically, he lost his life in prison under mysterious circumstances. The responsibility of raising the children fell solely on Irene's shoulders. Remembering how her mother single-handedly raised 3 children, Irene was determined to persevere. She successfully managed her business, earned well, and had big plans for the future. Relationship with Farid Hennesers. Farid Hennesers, a native of Barranquilla, Colombia, was born in 1976. Growing up in a large impoverished family, he was the youngest of his siblings. His parents separated in the early 90s when he was still a teenager. His older siblings were independent by then, and Farid stayed with his mother. In February 2001, at 25, Farid, along with his elderly mother, moved to Spain in search of a better life. They settled in Malaga, where Farid took any job he could to support himself and his mother. In February 2005, he started working as a waiter at a nightclub owned by Irene. Irene immediately noticed Farid's hard work and reliability. She was also attracted to him, and Farid in turn did his best to please her. At the time, Irene's husband was incarcerated, and she planned to file for divorce but couldn't before her husband's untimely demise. Irene and Farid's employer-employee relationship soon blossomed into romance. Farid wasn't deterred by Irene's 3 children from previous relationships, nor was Irene bothered by Farid's humble background as a waiter whose salary she paid. Within months of starting their relationship, the couple decided to move in together. They settled in Irene's spacious apartment, and soon after, Irene became pregnant with Farid's child. They went on to have 2 children together. It's unclear if they were officially married, but Irene kept her first husband's surname, while the children born with Farid carried the Hennesers surname. Imprisonment and infidelity. In February 2009, Irene's past seemed to repeat itself. Like her first husband, Farid was arrested for distributing illegal substances and sent to prison. Once again, Iran was left alone, this time with 5 children. Farid was sentenced to 3 years, but served only 1.5, being released early for good behavior and cooperation with the investigation. However, soon after Farid's imprisonment, Irene found solace in the arms of another man and lived with him for those 1.5 years. Farid learned of her infidelity only after his release. Understandably furious, he threatened Irene and her lover and almost attacked the man, narrowly avoiding another legal issue. Eventually, they resolved the matter peacefully. Farid forgave Irene for the sake of their children, and they resumed living together as if there had been no imprisonment or infidelity. Irene's relatives were always skeptical about Farid. Her mother and uncle disapproved of their relationship, suspecting Farid was only interested in Irene's money. Also, Irene's older children from her first marriage never accepted Farid, while the youngest, whom Farid had raised since the child was 2, saw him as a father figure. Fateful trip to Colombia. In early 2011, Irene's husband, Farid, expressed the need to visit his homeland of Colombia due to his father's severe illness. Reportedly, Farid's estranged father was diagnosed with advanced cancer, and his sister in Barranquilla had informed him of the dire situation. Irene, who had long wished to visit Farid's homeland, decided to accompany him. She was eager to meet Farid's father, whom she had never met, and also experienced the legendary Barranquilla Carnival, typically held in late February. Moreover, Irene, who hadn't taken a vacation for years due to her dedication to work and raising her 5 children, saw this trip as an opportunity for a much-needed break. The couple planned a 10-day trip across the ocean with Irene's mother and younger sister agreeing to care for her children during this period. Despite her mother, Maria Lucas' attempts to dissuade her from the journey due to a bad premonition, Irene disregarded her concerns. At the same time, the family faced financial difficulties due to a seasonal downturn in their business. Despite this, Irene had personal savings of 3,000 euros in cash hidden at home. But on the eve of their trip, she discovered the money had mysteriously vanished, almost derailing their plans. Irene quickly borrowed the necessary funds from her uncle and close friends. She also booked their flight tickets and a hotel in the city center, thoroughly preparing for a journey that, tragically, would be her last. Mysterious murder. On February 27, 2011, the couple arrived in Colombia. The flight was uneventful, and they immediately checked into their hotel. Irene called home to reassure her mother. However, 2 days later, Farid informed Irene's eldest son, 14, of his mother's death. Initially, Farid claimed an accident, but it was soon revealed that Irene was murdered during a robbery at a Barranquilla entertainment venue. The case quickly became a major news story in Colombia. The narrative was that Irene, a Spanish tourist, was killed by robbers who fled the scene, triggering a citywide policeman hunt. However, the circumstances of the robbery and murder seemed unusual and suspicious. The attackers did not appear to be trying to steal anything, but instead shot Irene in the heart and then fled in haste. Police and local media representatives quickly arrived on the scene. Despite the fact that Farid witnessed the shooting of his partner during an interview with journalists, he looked quite calm, not corresponding to the image of a grief-stricken widower. The Spanish embassy in Bogotá confirmed the murder, adding that Irene's remains will be repatriated after the necessary investigations. The exact events of the night of March 2nd have yet to be clarified by investigators. In the meantime, authorities are actively pursuing the attackers responsible for this senseless crime. Surveillance footage. The case of Irene Cortez's mysterious death seemed to gain clarity after reviewing surveillance footage from cameras installed at the location where the murder occurred. On March 1st, Irene and her partner, Farid had planned to meet Farid's brother, his sister, and their spouses. The group of 6 enjoyed the carnival, walked around town, and then, at Farid's suggestion, went to a local bar for dinner and entertainment. By 1 a.m., Irene, Farid, and his relatives were the only customers at the bar, as surveillance footage clearly shows. Around 2 a.m., 2 young men sitting away from the group entered the bar. They did not order anything and did not look comfortable, which caught the attention of the bar manager because of their suspicious behavior. Moreover, their young appearance made the manager check whether they were of legal age. The young men refused to show their IDs, and when asked to leave, One of them pulled out a gun and aimed it at the manager. His accomplice produced a knife, but soon retreated out of the camera's view. The armed assailant pushed the manager aside and approached Irene's table, announcing a robbery and demanding mobile phones and cash. His knife-wielding partner reappeared, presumably to collect valuables while the gunman kept the group under threat. However, he didn't get a chance to act. Confronting Irene, the gunman ordered Farid to stand for a pocket search. As Irene reached for her purse, the assailant lunged at her with the same hand holding the gun. A shot was fired as he grabbed the purse, striking Irene directly in the chest. She collapsed to the floor as the assailants fled without taking anything. Farid and his brother chased after them while his sister tried to stop Irene's bleeding, and his brother's wife called for emergency services. Unfortunately, the culprits were too fast to catch. The men returned to the bar attempting to aid Irene, but it was too late. Emergency responders arrived quickly, yet Irene succumbed to her injuries en route to the hospital, leaving behind a baffling case and a grieving family. The hunt for the perpetrators, arrest, and trial. In the wake of the robbery and homicide that took Irene Cortez's life, law enforcement mobilized all available resources. The city was teeming with tourists for the carnival, and ensuring their safety was paramount. A reward of 10 million pesos, about 3,500 euros, was announced for information leading to the culprits. The first suspect, the gunman Brian Dario, was apprehended the next day. He quickly implicated his accomplice, Juan Carlos. Juan, 18, surrendered to authorities, hoping for leniency. During interrogation, Dario claimed dire financial straits, debts, and a sick child in need of costly treatment drove him to the crime, corroborated later by his relatives. He maintained that Irene's shooting was accidental, occurring while trying to snatch her purse. Juan Carlos contended he was an unwitting participant. He said Brian didn't reveal his plans, but asked for backup in a job. He claimed to have only a small knife for intimidation, not harm, and left the scene once he realized Brian's intentions. However, surveillance footage contradicted his claims, showing him returning to Brian. With both perpetrators in custody and their confessions, the case appeared solved, with prison sentences looming. The court found Dario guilty of robbery and homicide under aggravating circumstances, sentencing him to 23 years. Carlos received 17 for complicity in these crimes. Accusations against Farid and new crime details. From the early stages of the investigation, the family of the deceased woman openly accused Farid of orchestrating the murder of his wife. Irene's mother and uncle hired a detective who conducted an independent investigation, gathering additional materials and evidence to hold the man accountable and prove his involvement in the crime, starting with the earlier mentioned disappearance of 3,000 euros from the hiding place in Cortez's house. According to Maria Lucas, only Farid knew about this money, and he was the only one who could have discreetly taken it. The woman told her daughter about this from the beginning, but she did not want to listen. Now, she believed that her son-in-law used this money to pay Dario to kill his wife. Another weighty argument was the fabricated illness of the man's father, whom he was so eager to visit. It turned out that no cancer diagnosis was made for the elderly parent, and he was quite healthy for his age. Farid concocted this story, making it the main pretext for the trip to Colombia. Also, it was janissaires who initiated the visit to that fateful establishment. Moreover, he insisted on continuing the feast deep into the night when all the other visitors had long dispersed, and their company was alone in the hall. Further, the detective conducted a detailed analysis of those very recordings from the cameras, giving an assessment of what was happening and making his own conclusions. He noticed that the criminals acted strangely. Juan was clearly scared and most likely really did not understand what was happening, while Brian approached the company, came up to Farid and raised him, but did not directly threaten him with a gun. It looked like the men knew each other and acted cohesively. Then Farid, strangely, moved behind Irene, who was sitting at the table. When she reached into her bag to get her wallet, the criminal with the gun looked at the man as if waiting for a signal. It's hard to say exactly whether he received any kind of sign, as the victim and her husband were back to the camera. After the shot, the man chased the killer, but in the expert's opinion, he deliberately let him escape. However, The latter statement can be considered controversial as Brian was armed with a gun and Farid could reasonably fear for his life. Also in question was the man's behavior after his chosen one was declared dead. He willingly gave interviews to the arrived correspondents, talked about the details of what happened, and at the same time did not look too upset or depressed. Another important question: why after the tragedy did janissaires call not Irene's mother, not her uncle or any of the adult relatives, but dialed the number of her 14-year-old son to tell him about his mother's death? According to Maria Lucas, he wanted to personally inflict pain on the teenager, punishing him for not recognizing the stepfather's authority and treating him disrespectfully. The woman's uncle was the first to dare to give an interview in the press and openly talk about his suspicions and the results of the investigation. Pedro Lucas was sure that Farid planned the trip in advance, essentially luring Irene into a trap. The money stolen from her was used to pay for the services of a hired killer, and after her death, he planned to establish guardianship over the children and take over the business of his deceased wife. Farid's mother did not silently listen to her son being accused of a terrible crime and openly stood up for her offspring. The woman claimed that her offspring was madly in love with Irene and her children and would never harm her. However, in the end, the parent inadvertently let slip a phrase about the chosen one not having to cheat on Farid, as this greatly offended his pride. Also, an unpleasant detail emerged about janissaires leaving Spain on fate documents, as he was not allowed to leave the country because he had recently been released from prison on parole. The man himself denied this information, stating that he left legally, and Irene acted as his guarantor. Funeral. Without the widower. 12 days after the tragedy, Irene's body was returned to her native Spain. The funeral was conducted with a closed casket as the remains had begun to decompose after such an extended period. Hundreds attended the funeral. Family, friends, neighbors, and even those who didn't personally know Cortez, but had heard about the resonant story and wanted to express their condolences to the family. The only person missing from the farewell ceremony was Farid, who simply feared returning from Colombia, apprehensive of retribution. Farid claimed that the relatives of his late wife had repeatedly threatened him and his elderly mother. For this reason, before flying back to Spain, he intended to appeal to the authorities to ensure his safety. He sought a protective order to be able to attend the funeral, but his request was denied, and janissaires decided not to take the risk. In turn, Farid filed a complaint in court against the relatives of his deceased wife, who he alleged hindered his return home. However, Maria and Pedro Lucas denied his claims, stating they were most interested in his return to face trial in Spain. Additional court proceedings. With new circumstances and accusations against Farid, an additional investigation and court proceedings were conducted. Dario and Carlos, already serving their sentences in a Colombian prison, were interrogated about their acquaintance with janissaires and a possible premeditated conspiracy. However, Brian categorically denied this assumption. He continued to insist that the murder was an accidental result of a failed robbery attempt. He claimed he had never seen Farid before, let alone been hired as a hitman for his wife. The accusations indeed seemed to be grasping at straws, with no irrefutable evidence of premeditation or a contract killing, only assumptions and interpretations of the events on the recording. Dario also confessed that he was under the influence of alcohol and prohibited substances that evening. Hence, his poor recollection of the event's chronology. As for Carlos, he maintained that his friend did not involve him in his plans, and everything that happened in the bar was as shocking to him as it was to those they attacked. Blon appeared to be telling the truth, but Brian's words, who made the fatal shot, raised some doubts. Consider this. He failed to commit the robbery, ended up in prison, but his sick child still received the necessary expensive treatment. Brian claimed that kind-hearted people learning about his motive helped him. However, the Lucas family's lawyers tried to prove that the 3,000 euros stolen from Irene, which Farid paid for her murder, were spent on the treatment. Supposedly, Brian agreed to sacrifice himself and go to prison to save his child and secretly pass the money to his wife. This version, however, was never proven. Returned to Spain. Only after obtaining a court order that guaranteed his safety did janissaires decide to return to Spain. Several months had passed since the tragedy, and the media frenzy had subsided. Upon his return, Janissaires claimed to have brought investigation materials proving his innocence in his wife's murder. He cited his main reason for returning as a desire to care for the children he shared with Irene, who had been under the care of the deceased's relatives during his absence. 6 months later, Farid decided to give a major interview in which he revealed that he had lost virtually everything. He was jobless. His passport had been annulled, preventing him from leaving the country. And to add insult to injury, his friends had turned their backs on him, and the mother and uncle of his late wife forbade him from seeing his children. Janissaires repeatedly faced Maria and Pedro Lucas in court. He accused them of threatening him while they attempted to prove his involvement in Irene's murder. However, neither side could substantiate their claims. Ultimately, the children remained in the custody of their grandmother and uncle, and the widower was unable to claim any of his late wife's property. Born on April 15, 1952 in Hamilton, Ohio, Donald Harvey was the oldest of 3 children. The boy, with his big brown eyes and curly hair, was lovingly called Donnie by his parents, Ray and Goldie Harvey. Shortly after his birth, the family moved to Boonville, Kentucky, a small community nestled away on the eastern slopes of the Appalachian Mountains. There, Ray worked as a tobacco farmer, while Goldie tended to the children and home. While the couple was struggling from extreme poverty, their marriage began to fall apart. Despite a rocky relationship, they were loving and nurturing to their 3 children. Although Donald was a quiet boy who mostly kept to himself, he apparently had shown no signs of any abnormality. Perhaps the seed of his sadistic and twisted mind was sowed long ago in his past. According to some reports, Donald abused and assaulted by at least 3 different men between the ages of 4 and 20. One of them was his own uncle on his mother's side. Another one older neighbor who offered Donald money at the age of 18. Donald claimed that he assaulted by his then roommate, Randy White. Though a traumatic past is no excuse for heinous crimes, it might be a point of discussion for psychologists and criminal profilers. In school, Donald always seemed to be a loner and antisocial. He rarely participated in extracurricular activities, opting instead to read books. While this got him good grades, it also earned him a reputation for being the teacher's pets, which led to teasing. Following his graduation from Sturgeon Elementary School, Donald entered Boonville High School in 1968. Despite his good scores, he rapidly became bored with a daily routine, which prompted him to drop out. He later received a diploma from a correspondence school out of Chicago and got his GED the following year at the age of 16. Having no future aspirations, Donald didn't know what he would do with his life at this point. He eventually relocated to Cincinnati, Ohio, where he managed to secure a job at a local factory. Donald was doing well in this job until the work dried up at the plant in 1970, and he was eventually laid off. A few days later, his mother called him and asked him to travel to Kentucky and visit his ailing grandfather, who was recently placed in Nuring-Out Hospital in London, Kentucky. He had no idea that agreeing to his mother's request would forever change the course of his life. While visiting his ill grandfather every day, Donald formed a trusting bond with the hospital workers. In fact, they liked him so much that he was offered a job at the hospital. It was here that a terrifying journey of madness and mayhem began, which would go on to last nearly 20 years. Donald's true motive for wanting to work as a nurse's aide might not even be known. However, some people believe that he was desperate to earn money after losing his previous job. He was not a trained nurse or doctor, but the hospital staff had full faith in him. Donald's duties required him to spend hours along with patients, including changing bedpans, inserting catheters, and passing out uneventful. That is, until one incident with an elderly patient snared something within him, a disturbing beginning to an unfathomable string of events. It was May 31st, 1970, and Donald was taking care of an 88-year-old stroke victim, Logan Evans. During an evening shift, he walked into a private room to check on the elderly patient, and Mr. Evans rubbed feces in Donald's face. Although the patient was most likely not in his right mind following his stroke, The incident angered Donald so much that he lost all control. The next thing he knew, he was smothering the elderly man with a blue plastic bag and a pillow. Once Evans was motionless, Donald listened to his heart rate with a stethoscope to make sure that he was dead. He then disposed of the plastic bag and cleaned them up, dressing them in a clean hospital gown and showering before notifying the nurses. After this incident, no eyebrows were raised and no questions were asked. I went to full back to shade. He covered me in stone, within his hand, and I was smelling. Then heading to do that Pithapillum as a predator who just got his first taste of blood. Donald's thirst for killing only grew. The very next day, he was looking after another elderly patient, 69-year-old James Tyree. Donald, it seems, used the wrong size catheter on him. Tyree initially let him proceed, but then yelled at him to take it out. Donald used the heel of his hand to control him until he'd vomited blood and died due to an air embolism. Again, no suspicions were raised. As no one detected foul play in his first two murders, Donald became more carefree. Just 3 weeks after committing his first murder, he cut off the oxygen tank of 42-year-old patient Elizabeth Wyatt. This was the beginning of his mercy kill, as he would call his killings later. He claimed he was aware that she was praying to die and even told him she wished she could die, so he killed her to end her suffering. For hours later, a nurse found her dead. Again, no one questioned Donald. Since no one at the hospital became suspicious, Donald saw this as an opportunity to unleash his inner monster. Over the next 10 months, 15 patients died under his care while working at the hospital. Be it pleasure or experimentation, the methods of each murder varied. Smothering, sabotaging oxygen tags, injecting lethal drugs, overdosing people with medication, it seems he would use almost anything to kill. When angered, his methods became more brutal. On one occasion, after an argument with a patient, Donald snuck into the patient's room and inserted a coat hanger through his catheter, puncturing his bladder and bowel. As a result of the puncture, infection set in, and the man died a few days later. Despite this brutality, Donald always considered these killings to be merciful. The self-proclaimed angel of death wanted to play God with the lives of the vulnerable, cloaking his monstrosities in a warm blanket by giving them the title Mercy Killings. March 31st, 1971, exactly 1 year after his first murder, was the last day Donald worked at Marymount Hospital. That evening, he was arrested for a burglary he committed while drunk. In his drunken stupor, Donald incoherently confessed about the murders to the cops, but no one took him seriously. Donald ultimately placed charges of petty theft. Instead of serving prison time, he paid a hefty fine. Although Donald managed to remain free, this incident changed the course of his life for a brief time. For the next few months, Donald tried to get his life back in order and eventually found work as a part-time nurse's aide at Cardinal Hill Hospital in Lexington. In June of 1973, he started a second nursing job at Lexington's Good Samaritan Hospital. He worked both jobs simultaneously until deciding to move on to other positions. Between August 1974 and September 1975, he worked first as a telephone operator in Lexington and then as a clerk at St. Luke's Hospital in Fort Thomas, Kentucky. For some reason, Donald was able to control his urge to kill during this time. It's possible that he simply did not have the same access to the patients as he did at his previous workplace, which could also explain why he shifted from job to job during this time. Despite his efforts to keep his killing urges in check, his inner demons slowly became increasingly more difficult to manage, finally driving him across the state line into Cincinnati, Ohio. In September 1975, Donald moved back to Cincinnati, and within weeks, he started working the night shift at the Cincinnati VA Medical Hospital. He worked there as a nursing assistant, housekeeping aide, cardiac catheterization technician, and autopsy assistant. As he became more comfortable in a hospital setting once again, he started right where he had left off. Since he worked at night, he had very little supervision and unlimited access to all the areas of the hospital. Over the course of the following 10 years, Donald would end up murdering at least 15 patients while working at the hospital. To relish all his crimes, he even kept a detailed diary of his murders and took notes on each victim. These grisly details included sprinkling rat poison in a patient's dessert, pressing a plastic bag and wet towel over the mouth and nose, injecting cyanide into an intravenous tube, adding arsenic and cyanide to orange juice, injecting cyanide into a patient's buttocks, and many more. Yet the depravity of his crimes did not end there. Throughout his murder spree, Donald was experimenting with different methods based on medical journals he was studying for hints as to how to better conceal his crimes. Cyanide soon became his favorite tool for murder. He'd mix it into the victim's food or pour it directly into their gastric tube. Over the years, he amassed an astounding 30 pounds of cyanide, which he had slowly pilfered from the hospital. He would keep his deadly supply at home for safekeeping. Despite all the deaths, Donald Harvey always managed to stay under anyone's radar. He had carefully set up all of his killing to look like accidents or natural causes. Donald even earned himself the nickname the Angel of Death and the Kiss of Death amongst his co-workers. They all thought it was a coincidence that he was always around when these deaths occurred. Little did they suspect that their charming co-worker was a silent creditor. Although years down the line, Donald insisted that his crimes were merely an act of mercy motivated by compassion, there were other crimes that speak otherwise. The beginning of the 1980s brought out variations in both Donald's life and his crimes. Without a doubt, these crimes were purely driven by rage and revenge. In the early 1980s, Donald briefly began dating a man named Doug Hill. The relationship was challenging from the start as they argued on a regular basis. After one of those heated fights, Donald retaliated by slipping arsenic into Doug's ice cream. Although he survived, the incident signified the first instance where Donald tried to harm someone outside of the hospital. This was a chilling sign that the monster had begun to stretch his boundaries. Following another follow-up with Doug, Donald moved in with another lover, Colonel Howler, within a short period of time. The relationship was going well in the beginning before Donald suspected Howler of cheating on him. Out of jealousy, he would add small doses of arsenic into Heller's food so that he would be too ill to leave their apartment. At this point, Donald's acts of revenge were no longer limited to his home or workplace. On one occasion, following an argument, he laced one of the beverages of his female neighbor with hepatitis serum, which nearly killed her before the infection was diagnosed and treated. While luck was on her side, it wouldn't be the same for another of Donald's neighbors, Helen Metzger. The arsenic he put in one of her pies caused her death at a local hospital a week later. Donald's confidence was soaring high after getting away with so many murders. He must have felt invincible. In April 1983, after tiff with Howler's parents, Donald regularly began to poison their food with arsenic and saw doses. On May 1, 1983, Howler's father, Henry, suffered a stroke and was admitted to Providence Hospital. To complete his unfinished business, Donald placed arsenic in his pudding before leaving during a hospital visit. Sadly, the elderly man died later that night. Donald continued to poison Carl's mother, Margaret, off and on for the next year, but was unsuccessful in his attempts to kill her. In January 1984, Hawela broke up with Donald and asked him to move out. Needless to say, Donald was not happy about it. Unable to accept the rejection, he spent the next 2 years trying to kill his former partner with his poisonous concoctions. As a means of revenge, Donald even went to great lengths in an unsuccessful murder attempt against one of Howler's female friends. Though he managed to land Howler in the hospital at one point, his attempts to eliminate him from the face of the earth had failed. The first cloud of suspicion that loomed over Donald's head was on July 18, 1985, when security guards noticed Donald acting suspiciously and decided to search his gym bag. Inside the haversack, the guards discovered a .38 caliber pistol, hypodermic needles, surgical scissors, gloves, a cocaine spoon, various medical texts, 2 occult books, and a biography of serial killer Charles Sobridge. Fined $50 for carrying a firearm on federal property. Donald was then given the option to quietly resign from his job rather than be fired. Call it a stroke of luck or pure negligence from law enforcement side. None of these ever appeared in his work record, and the hospital authorities did not open an investigation to determine if the man was responsible for any other crimes while working at the hospital. It took Donald 7 months to secure another job at a local hospital. In February of 1986, he started working as a part-time nurse's aide at Drake Memorial Hospital in Cincinnati. Unaware of his past and impressed by his performance, His new employers soon offered him a full-time position at the hospital. Before long, Donald settled back into his old routine. Over the next 13 months, Harvey murdered another 26 patients and attempted to kill several more by disconnecting life support machines, injecting iron to veins, causing suffocation, and injecting arsenic, cyanide, and petroleum-based cleaners. The 2-decade-long murder spree came to an end with one last murder. On March 7, 1987, a 44-year-old patient, John Powell, mysteriously died. Powell was on life support from a bad motorcycle accident for several months before his demise, but had since started to recover. Due to Ohio's law of a mandatory autopsy for a vehicular homicide, this death landed Donald in a situation that he had never faced before. During the autopsy, an assistant coroner noticed the faint scent of almonds, which is a telltale sign of cyanide. Authorities got involved in the death following this concerning discovery. Initially, suspicion fell upon the people closer to Powell, but investigators failed to come up with any evidence or a motive pointing toward any of Powell's friends or family members. So it did not take them long to focus on hospital employees who had access to Powell's room. Donald Harvey was one of those names on the short list. To rule out their names, hospital employees at this point were volunteering to take polygraph tests. Donald also volunteered to take a test and even bought a book on how to beat lie detector tests. But eventually, he did not go through with the test and called in sick on the day of his scheduled appointment. If this was not concerning enough, investigators learned about his questionable department from the VA hospital as well as his notorious hospital nickname, Angel of Death. Given the numerous unusual deaths that seemed to surround him, authorities began to focus their entire investigation on Donald. He was brought in for questioning. In the initial interrogation phase, Donald denied having anything to do with Powell's murder and portrayed himself as a victim of coincidence. It was only after hours of questioning and playing a bit of good cop, bad cop that he finally confessed to having put cyanide in John Powell's G-tube. He tried to explain that it was because he felt sorry for him and his family. He still denied responsibility for any of the other suspicious deaths. Donald was taken into custody while investigators began to look for other evidence. On August 11, 1987, Donald Harvey, 35 at the time, sat down with investigators and confessed to committing 33 murders over the previous 17 years. The number grew to 70 in total as the days passed. Investigators wanted Donald to be checked for his mental state before his claims were taken to be accurate, as they were doubtful of the numbers Donald provided them, following several psychiatric tests by numerous experts. It was determined that Donald knew the difference between right and wrong and was able to conform to the conduct of the law. Hence, he was sane and confident. In November of 1987, Donald Harvey was sentenced to 8 life terms plus 20 years for the murders in Marymount Hospital. In February 1988, he entered guilty pleas on 3 additional Cincinnati homicides and 3 attempted murders, drawing 3 life sentences plus 3 terms of 7 to 25 years. The investigation into the remaining deaths were closed after 2 years as investigators determined that there was not enough evidence to implicate him in the murders. Whether people were stunned or disgusted by his actions, they definitely were intrigued to know what went on inside his sick mind. In the 1991 interview, a reporter from the Columbus Dispatch asked Donald Harvey about his motive behind the killings. Giving away a rare glimpse inside his mind, Donald said that the reign of terror began with a desire for control. In his eyes, people controlled him for 18 years, and then he controlled his own destiny. He loved the power and to be able to control whether people lived or died. Even in the world of serial killers, Donald Harvey holds a special place, not only because of his overwhelming kill count, but also because of his choice to kill people he personally knew in addition to his patients. According to an article published on July 23, 2001 by the Associated Press listing the worst serial killers in the United States, Donald Harvey held the number 1 place, even surpassing the notorious John Wayne Gacy. While everyone expected Donald Harvey to spend his days behind bars, and unlike his unfortunate victims, die a natural death, destiny had something else in store for him. On March 28, 2017, 64-year-old Donald Harvey was found badly beaten inside his cell in protective custody at the Toledo Correctional Institution in Lucas County. He would die 2 days later at the age of 64 from blunt head trauma due to skull fracture and brain damage. Months after the death, an inmate named James D. Elliott, serving 37 years for numerous burglary offenses, would later write the Toledo Blade and confess to the murder. In those letters, Elliott confessed to punching and stomping on Donald in his cell. He said he grew up in Kentucky near some relatives of Donald's victims and claimed that he committed the crime to give them some closure and peace of mind. Hopefully, everyone from our area will take some solace in the fact that one of their own gave Harvey the punishment that he should have gotten from the courts, Elliott was quoted as writing. In September 2019, Elliott was sentenced to life in prison after pleading guilty to the murder of the infamous Angel of Death. To his last day, Donald Harvey insisted that the majority of his killings were out of mercy. But the truth is, in the process of becoming a murderer from a nurse, Donald appointed himself the judge, jury, and executioner over people's lives. Perhaps because he was not caught for decades, he assumed it was his right to control other people's lives. The Sharp family lived in Victoria, Australia, a place with peaceful beaches and quiet suburban life. John Sharp, his pregnant wife Anna, and their adorable daughter Gracie seemed a happy family. But this image was soon shattered, leading to one of the most heart-wrenching cases in Australian history. In March 2004, the Sharp family home became a crime scene. Anna Kemp and her daughter, Gracie, vanished without a trace. Born on February 28, 1967, John Sharp grew up in a world familiar to many of us, a childhood marked by the usual ups and downs, aspirations shaped by the world around him, and the pursuit of happiness supported by his family. Raised in a community where neighbors knew each other by name and children played freely under the sun, John's formative years seemed filled with simple joys. As John transitioned into adolescence, those who knew him observed his evolution from a bright-eyed child into a quiet, somewhat introverted young man, intelligent and courteous, yet always on the periphery as if watching the world from a distance. John was always there, but somehow apart, like he was searching for something he couldn't quite find among the people around him. It was during these formative years that John's path began to subtly diverge, laying the groundwork for the man he would become. His silent observations, the unvoiced thoughts simmering beneath a calm exterior, might have been the early signs of an upcoming storm. Anna Kemp, coming from New Zealand, brought with her the promise of new beginnings when she arrived in Australia. Her infectious smile and love of life touched the hearts of those around her, including John Sharp's. They met at the Commonwealth Bank of Australia where they both worked. Anna was 4 years John's senior. Laughter shared over coffee and long walks along the beach culminated in their wedding day. Anna's spirit was a stark contrast to John's quiet introspection, yet their paths were destined to intertwine, igniting a tragic sequence of events. Maybe it was the allure of opposites attracting that drew them together, or perhaps something deeper, a shared longing for connection, for being understood. They married in October 1994 and lived in various places around the Mornington Peninsula area of South Melbourne. The future seemed bright, filled with endless possibilities. But behind the joys of marriage, the initial signs of strain began to emerge. The arrival of a child brings a new dawn for a family. Gracie, born in August 2002, with her innocent eyes and radiant smile, became the center of John and Anna's world. Yet the joy of parenthood also brought new challenges, casting long shadows on their peaceful family life. Every home holds its secrets, its private sorrows, and silent battles. For John and Anna, the dream of a happy family life in the suburbs of the Mornington Peninsula soon faced trials that tested their bond. Gracie was diagnosed with hip dysplasia, requiring a corrective orthopedic harness and causing her endless discomfort. Her early months were marked by relentless crying and sleepless nights, a situation that tested her parents to their limits. Once the harness was removed, problems with eating began and her sleep issues persisted. Anna sought professional help for these challenges. The family relocated one last time to a residence on Prince Street in Mornington, a quiet coastal town about 35 miles south of Melbourne. This place would tragically become the final setting for Anna and Gracie. In November 2003, Anna became pregnant with their second child. Gracie was just 15 old. Anna was very excited. She was a loving mother, and Gracie was what she was living for. She'd always wanted more than one child because she never wanted her daughter to be on her own, so that when she and her husband were no longer there, Gracie would have somebody. The facade of family harmony lasted until March 21st, 2004 at a nephew's birthday celebration, the last time when Anna was seen alive. Guests saw no signs of discord between Anna and her caring husband, John. The next day, Anna dropped Gracie off at daycare and arranged to catch up with a friend. Her final contact with someone outside her marriage occurred the day after during a call to her private health insurance company where she discussed extending their health cover to include their expected child. Then John called Anna's friends to tell them she had left with another man and had left Gracie with him. He reached out to Anna's mother, claiming she had abandoned him for another man, and he was unaware of her whereabouts. Though he anticipated she would return for their daughter within the week, he kept bringing Gracie to her daycare, telling the staff that he and his wife had parted ways, which meant Gracie wouldn't be coming back to the daycare. Anna's family received emails from Anna, and her mother received a bouquet of flowers from her daughter, but no phone call. The initial shock and confusion of Anna's friends and family quickly turned to worry. How could a devoted mother and her child simply disappear without a word? By May 2004, Sharp, engaging with the media, painted a picture of a man tormented by his family's disappearance. He said to the local paper, "Anyone that knows me knows I gave 100% for my daughter and my marriage." In a public plea, Sharp, holding a photo of Gracie, professed enduring love for Anna, saying, "Anna, our marriage may be over, but I still love you, and you are the mother of our beautiful daughter, Gracie, whom we both adore more than anyone else." He claimed he had spoken to Anna a week earlier and that she had left him for another man. He asked anyone with information to come forward. He said, "My biggest fear is being denied a part of Gracie's future." His demeanor and statements, however, seemed odd and struck a discordant note, inviting scrutiny over his narrative's authenticity. Despite proclaiming their marital dissolution and inconsistency highlighted by his premature use of the past tense when speaking about his family, a detail that did not escape police notice. Behind the scenes, law enforcement began to peel back the layers of John Sharp's carefully constructed narrative. Each unanswered question pointed to a darker reality. What secrets lay buried within the Sharp family? Anna and her mother used to call each other every couple of days. When Anna missed several of her calls, she grew concerned. She called Sharp, who justified Anna's absence with weak explanations like being busy taking Gracie to daycare. This made her even more worried. Anna's devout Catholic beliefs and her unlikely affair and abandonment initially without Gracie, and at 20 weeks pregnant, fueled her family's distrust toward Sharp's account, further aggravated by the impersonal email and gift without any phone contact. Upon Anna's continued absence, her mother alerted the police in New Zealand and reported her daughter missing, prompting communication with the Mornington authorities. Confronted by the police, Sharp told them Anna got into a blue car and relocated to Chelsea with their daughter, denying any knowledge or involvement into their disappearance. The search for Anna and Gracie commenced with urgency. Missing Persons Officer Norelle Fraser said detectives had to keep an open mind and not assume the mother and daughter were dead as they had only been reported missing. She said Anna's bank account had been used intermittently, and her phone was used once or twice. "We kept thinking, is she alive?" But as days passed, hope began to fade, replaced by a gnawing realization that the answers they sought might reveal a truth too painful to bear. Sharp quickly became the main suspect since there was no evidence to support his statement. The investigation's pace quickened as new information surfaced. Friends and acquaintances came forward, their testimonies shedding light on the growing tensions behind the closed doors of the Sharps' home. One of the friends confessed she mentioned they were going through a tough time. "I never imagined it could lead to this." The investigators increased pressure on Sharp, trying to make him nervous so that he would make a mistake. He lived like a recluse and never had guests. Their family home was ominously quiet. John was followed by undercover officers to monitor his movements. Soon, there was a breakthrough in the case. To mislead investigators, Sharp periodically utilized Emma's phone and bank card, crafting an illusion of her active presence across the southeast suburbs of Victoria. However, this charade crumbled under police surveillance capturing Sharp's attempts to conceal evidence. The surveillance caught him on camera driving to Chelsea Beach and pulling a white plastic bag from the bush next to the public toilet. He took out Anna's phone from the bag and made a call. Then he withdrew some cash from the nearest ATM. After that, he disposed of the bag with the phone and card by putting them into a trash can in Mount Martha. He then drove home and called the missing persons unit, telling them that his wife had just called him and withdrawn cash from their joint account. But the team already knew exactly what had happened. The evidence was irrefutable, pointing to a conclusion that was unthinkable. Not having enough evidence to charge Sharp with murders and being unable to determine his motive, the investigators hoped that he could lead them to the bodies. But as days passed with no action from Sharp, the decision to arrest him was made. On June 10th, Sharp faced another round of questioning by the authorities. He persisted that Anna had willingly departed on March 23rd. However, the investigators remained skeptical, noting his emotional detachment regarding his wife's supposed affair and subsequent departure with their daughter. Discrepancies in Sharp's timeline emerge. The man who claimed ignorance now appears as a master of evasion. Norelle Fraser said about Sharp, "I don't think anybody would know how John felt about anything. He was a closed book. He was very insular. He was a loner. He didn't show any emotion. He showed no personality." The investigators thought of another way to get his confession. They invited his parents and showed them the footage of John on Chelsea Beach and then asked them to talk to their son. It is the presentation of an undeniable piece of evidence that marks the turning point in the investigation. An hour after his parents left, John began to talk as he realized the inevitability of his situation. His final barriers of denial and self-preservation eroded, revealing the truth of his psyche, a man ensnared by his own darkest impulses. What turned his heart so cold that he became a stranger even to those who thought they knew him best? Sometimes the greatest dangers lurk in the places we expect the least. Sharp's confession laid bare the reality of what transpired within the walls of the Sharp home. He told police he had transpired within the walls of the Sharp home. He told police he had fantasies of murdering his wife for several months before ultimately killing her. Adjusting to life with a baby, sleepless nights, financial pressures, and the routine of daily life added layers of complexity, pushing the family to a breaking point. Sharp explained that he killed Anna because she was controlling and moody and was getting on his nerves. Their marriage was unhappy. Sharp perceived his wife's assertive personality as undermining his masculinity. He stated Anna used to wear the pants in the family. Sharp told the investigators that Anna's pregnancy was a surprise to him. He didn't want another child and viewed the new pregnancy as an additional burden, harboring resentment towards Anna and their unborn child in silence instead of voicing his concerns. He even questioned if it was his child at all. John was self-employed as a conveyancer. The financial responsibility of a growing family overwhelmed him. He seemed withdrawn. Anna was trying to bridge the growing distance between them. But as she reached out, John's retreat into himself became more pronounced. With each passing day, John became more distant, a prisoner of his own mind, ensnared by thoughts he could not share and feelings he could not express. Anna thought to keep her family together, unaware of the darkness taking hold of her husband's heart. The chasm between John isolated in his thoughts and Anna attending to the needs of their home and children widened, filled with unsaid words and unacknowledged fears. Anna found herself facing a wall of silence, her efforts met with indifference or worse, hostility. Sharp made an unexpected and ominous purchase in early 2003, a high-powered spear gun from a Sport Philip Marine in Mornington, an interest he had never before expressed. This marked the beginning of a dark and tragic chapter. Sharp dedicated countless hours to mastering the spear gun in their backyard, familiarizing himself with its mechanics. In the days that followed, a domestic dispute escalated into an unimaginable horror. Gerald Kemp, Anna's brother, told reporters that in February 2004, Anna had an ultrasound to determine their baby's gender, but Sharp did not even bother going to the doctor's appointment with her. Upon her return, she anticipated her husband's eagerness to learn about the baby's gender only to find he showed no interest and didn't even ask her. Distressed by his apathy, Anna confronted Sharp, warning him that if he continued to be indifferent to their daughter and unborn child, She was going to leave him. They went to bed at around 9 or 10 p.m. Anna quickly fell asleep while John stayed awake, consumed by their argument and the overall dissatisfaction with their marriage. Eventually, he stepped out to the backyard garage, retrieving the spear gun that he didn't use outside of his target practice sessions. In a chilling sequence of events, Sharp crept back into the room where Anna was sleeping peacefully, coldly aiming a charged spear gun at her while their 20-year-old daughter lay asleep in her bed. The first shot did not end her life as she was still breathing, and with a grim resolve, he reloaded and fired again, this time fatally wounding Anna and the unborn child she carried. Afterward, he covered her with towels and retreated to sleep the rest of the night on the sofa downstairs. The next morning, Sharp tried to remove the spears, but managed to remove only the shafts. Completing this grim task, he then dropped off Gracie at her daycare, later turning away a TV antenna technician booked by Anna with the excuse of Anna's absence, her body still in the bedroom. Under the cover of night, he buried Anna in a hastily dug shallow grave in the garden. Officer Fraser said, It's almost difficult to describe, but to hear a man talk about murdering his wife who was 3 months pregnant, that was hard enough, but he said it with no emotion whatsoever. She compared his confession to saying what he'd had for breakfast that morning. In the days that followed, Sharp took Gracie and revisited the marine supply store for another spear. He said, I was thinking of taking care of Gracie by myself. And just amongst all this madness, that's when I lost the plot. When asked why he killed Gracie, he said, I don't really know, and called it irrational madness. Sharp told the police, you know what you're doing is sort of insane, but there's just this weird part of you that's almost unstoppable or something. You're almost like an automatic pilot sort of thing. I can't really remember much of what I thought of anything, just apart from the sort of crazy sensation. It was totally emotional. He said that for the next 4 days, voices in his head debated Gracie's fate. A few days after the murder, he started thinking Gracie needed to be with her mom. It was sort of in and out of my head all week. I could hear things going through my head. The voices saying, you can't do it. You can do it. You've got to do it. Every option was coming up. On March 27th, after putting Gracie into her cot, Sharp drank a few glasses of whiskey and cola, confessing that he did this to numb his senses for what he was about to do. Then he went to the garage. Armed once again with the spear gun, he inflicted unimaginable terror on Gracie, who endured multiple shots before her tragic death at her father's hands. Same as Anna, Gracie didn't die at once. After the 4th shot, she was dead. The next morning, Sharp returned to Gracie's bedroom. He could not bear looking at her, so he had to hold a towel in front of his face. Then he removed the bolts. Concluding his macabre errands, Sharp acquired a chainsaw at a local Bunnings Warehouse hardware store in Frankston. He unearthed Anna's remains from their garden. He'd undisposed of Anna's and Gracie's bodies in garbage bags at the Mornington Refuse Transfer Station. He also discarded the spear gun, the chainsaw, and Gracie's clothes and toys. I have a bootload of hard waste, he told the attendant. Officer Fraser said, This is his wife that's pregnant. I kept thinking what was coming next, and then he told us about little Gracie. It's the most difficult interview I have ever listened to. I remember at one stage there was a break in the interview. I went to the ladies' toilets and I just put my head in my hands. Couldn't listen. Sharp then called Anna's friends and family with a fabricated story of her affair. Her friends said that immediately, alarm bells rang, and her hairs on the back of her neck stood up because there was no way Anna would leave Gracie behind. Following the murder of his daughter, he made a second call to his mother-in-law, telling her that Gracie was now with Anna in a bigger and better place. At his residence, Sharp crafted an email from Anna to her family in New Zealand to convince them she was fine. The messages didn't sound like her daughter had written them. Sharp used Anna's email account to contact her brother as well. In the email, he claimed she had departed with another man with whom she was expecting a child. One of the emails read, Please respect and understand my wish for privacy and take comfort in the fact that I'm about to enjoy life like I have never before. This act only intensified the mystery surrounding Anna's prolonged silence. The family filed a missing person report on Anna. The interview uncovered that he had jotted down notes for his cover story. While analyzing Sharp's TV appearances, body language expert Dr. Cliff Lamsley, said that this was a poor attempt at portraying concern and sadness. He was juggling his eyebrows, contorting his face, and using a tissue as a prop. Though there was no moisture on his nose, no tears on his face, it's a convincing tactic that we rarely see with truth-tellers. The family told the police some disturbing facts. They believed Sharp's motive for murdering Anna was her discovery of Gracie's abuse by her husband. Although there was no evidence to support this theory, Sharp had a history of abusing the children of family and friends. Anna didn't know this before marrying him. One relative said, "We reckon she caught him. We think that's why he killed her." When one of Sharp's former victims became an adult, she confronted him about the abuse. In response, Sharp called her a derogatory name and told her she deserved it. The victim was tormented by the thought that reporting it earlier could have prevented the murders. Anna's brother later said that after the couple's honeymoon, she told her mother about their marriage. "I think I've made a mistake." Her brother remarked she just carried on with the mistake. She said there was no passion or love. Nevertheless, the couple continued their life together. An exhaustive 3-week search at a landfill in Mornington eventually led to the discovery of both Anna and Gracie's remains. Norelle Fraser was a member of Victoria Police for almost 30 years. One case she will never forget is the Mornington Monster. During the search, she spotted a blue bag. She opened it, but saw a kitchen glove, so the search continued. However, she had a gut feeling that something was wrong, so she returned to the bag. She then realized that the glove was not what it seemed. She said, "It's funny, but I knew I'd find Anna. Just an innate feeling I can't describe any better than that. And when I did find her, I couldn't leave her. I sat with the bag waiting for crime scene to arrive. I couldn't bear the thought of her being alone in the tip without anyone with her. I've thought about it since, and I know it sounds bizarre, but I almost feel like Anna was reaching out to me. I was determined to make sure that Anna wouldn't end her life in this tip. I just knew I would find her, and I did." Soon she realized that Gracie must be close by. "I put my head in my hands and I just cried. I cried for what Anna had endured, for Anna's family, for humanity as a whole, I suppose." They were laid to rest at Green Park Cemetery in New Zealand with Anna's maiden name, Kemp, marking their final resting place. The memorial also bears the name of Anna's unborn son, Francis. During the trial, the attorney aimed to shed light on John Sharp's psyche, his mental anguish that preceded the tragic events. Through the defense's lens, Sharp's life was depicted as being full of mounting pressures, financial strain, marital discord, and a crippling sense of entrapment. The sentencing judge said the events of the crime were too awful to contemplate and singular in its barbarity. He stated that Sharp had murdered his daughter simply so that his first crime would not be discovered, which was unspeakably callous. Forensic psychologist Carrie Dane said, "John Sharp was a quiet man, a shy man. Another way of looking at this was that he was actually quite socially inept. He didn't have much in the way of communication skills. He didn't have a lot of emotional intelligence." Psychiatrist Dr. Lester Walton had described Sharp as dependent, passive, and a retiring individual who was unable or reluctant to confront problems. Sharp believed the only way of solving his marriage difficulties was to kill his wife. The Mornington Monster pleaded guilty to the murders committed against both Emma and Gracie, receiving 2 consecutive terms of life imprisonment for each without eligibility for parole before 33 years. He will be eligible for parole in 2037. Sharp wept like a baby on hearing the verdict. He is kept under protective custody while serving his sentence as he faces life threats from other inmates. Sharp's elderly parents said John's crimes were horrific. He has given himself a life sentence for what he has done, and he will live with this for the rest of his life. One of Sharp's nieces said that his crimes have stolen 3 beautiful and precious lives. Sharp's crime is considered Victoria's worst case of familicide. Investigator Shane Brendel said, "It's a healing process for us as much as anyone else. And with the passage of time, that gets a little easier. But it certainly makes you appreciate your own circumstances, your own family, and cherish every moment that you have with them. Knowing that there's people out there that resort to these sorts of means to eradicate their own families just makes you know how special and important your own families are." Robbie and Floyd was last seen on December 1st, 1996 by a neighbor outside of her house on Winter Park Drive in Fayetteville, North Carolina. The neighbor stated that Robbie was packing boxes into her blue van. She was accompanied by 3 of her 4 children, Serena Glenn and Brent and Brittany Hughes, and Robbie's younger sister, Jennifer Hughes, along with an unidentified woman. The neighbor reported that Robbie introduced the woman as her mother, but her real mother later said that she had not visited the house in several years. Robbie claimed to be on her way to visit her sick father in Alabama. They also stated that Robbie seemed to be in a hurry as well. After leaving, they have never been seen again. At the time of her disappearance, Robbie was married to Jason Allen Floyd, whose nickname is Shane. She and Jason had 1 son together, Brandon. Jason and Brandon both remained at their Fayetteville residence after Robbie, Jennifer, Serena, Brent, and Brittany had left. At the time, Robbie's sister, Jennifer, was 17, Serena was 11, and twins Brent and Brittany were 4 years old. The twins both had a heart condition that required medical attention. Jason told authorities that Robbie and the others had left to go to Sylacauga, Alabama, and that he had spoken with her shortly after she departed North Carolina in 1996. He claimed that Robbie was staying at a motel near her father's home and promised to call him again several days later. Jason stated that he never heard or saw his wife and other family members again. Authorities learned that Robbie and Jason were having marital problems in 1996 but had reconciled prior to her disappearance after being separated for some time before December 1996. A neighbor told investigators that Jason and Brandon continued to live at the Fayetteville, North Carolina home until February 1997, 2 months after their family members were last seen, but then left the area. She also stated that Jason mentioned he and Robbie getting a divorce. Even though some of this seems strange, Jason is not believed to have been involved in his family's disappearance. Robbie did not maintain constant communication with her family members in 1996. Because of this, her sister and children were not reported missing until August of 1998, almost 2 years after they were last seen. Relatives in Alabama stated that Robbie and the others never arrived in the state. Robbie's mother stated that it is uncharacteristic of Robbie to voluntarily disappear for an extended period of time. She also stated that Robbie planned on moving her sick father to North Carolina in 1997 to care for him. He sadly passed away in 1998. Robbie never registered her van and has not renewed her driver's license since her disappearance. Authorities are stumped and are unsure what led the family members to vanish. In a February 2014 article, detectives stated that there have been confirmed sightings of Jennifer Hughes, including one at Walmart on Ramsey Street in Fayetteville. They said Floyd and her children may be hiding out in Alabama. Family members, including Serena's father Jerry Glenn, hopes he will someday see his daughter again, but states, "My gut feeling tells me something's not right. Just for 5 people coming up missing doesn't sound good from the start." Authorities have stated there continues to be no activity on their social security numbers and that no schools have ever called for their records. "It's as if they don't exist anymore," stated Lieutenant Jimmy Black of the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office. As of today, this case remains unsolved. 22-year-old Pretty Ashley Porter was last seen in Gastonia, North Carolina on the evening of April 19, 2009. She went by her middle name Ashley and lived with her mother and stepfather on Windy Hill Drive. Sunday, April 19th began as a normal day with Ashley and her mother going to church with other family members. They all had dinner together, and after dinner, she spent some time on MySpace and then went to a neighbor's house. At 10 p.m., she returned home and told her mother goodnight. The next morning, her mother went to get a coat out of Ashley's closet and had to knock on her door because it was locked. After Ashley's mother got no answer, she had her husband, Ashley's stepfather, open the door, where they found the bedroom window screen missing and Ashley gone. She has never been seen or heard from again. All her belongings, including her purse, cell phone, clothes, and money, were all left behind. Ashley's family believes that she climbed out of her bedroom window that night to speak to someone and planned on coming home. Her mom, thinking the best, thought that maybe Ashley had left on her own and forgot to call, and therefore waited another week before she called police. According to Ashley's family, One of her ex-boyfriends was abusive towards her, and as a result was not welcome into the Porter's home, which answers the question why Ashley may have felt the need to sneak out the window. This individual has not been identified, and it is unclear if he is involved in her case. Ashley graduated from Ashbrook High School 2 years earlier in February 2007 and worked manufacturing jobs afterward. Her family stated she did not use drugs or drink obsessively and had never been in trouble with the law. Police reports initially noted Ashley's disappearance as not a crime, missing person. However, over time, they began to suspect foul play, and a 2017 news article noted that authorities are currently releasing little information about the investigation as they do not want to jeopardize it. Sadly, there is little information to go on in this case, and as of today, it remains unsolved. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.